I am Joshua, 28 years old, and my parents threw me out in trash bags when I was 13 just to afford my brother's football camp. Before I tell you how I legally wiped them out of a $20 million inheritance, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. To understand the absolute satisfaction of what happened in downtown Seattle last month, you need to understand the people sitting across from me at that massive mahogany conference table. The air in the room was sterile, smelling faintly of expensive leather and bitter coffee, but the tension was thick enough to choke on. My mother, Martha, sat dead center. She wore a black designer dress that she had clearly bought just for this occasion, paired with a string of pearls that caught the harsh fluorescent light. She looked around the prestigious law office like she was already calculating how to spend the money. She actually smirked at me. It was a small, arrogant lift of her upper lip. Next to her sat my father, Robert. He looked older, tired, his suit pulling tight across his stomach, staring at his hands like a man waiting for a bus. And then there was my brother, Wyatt, the golden boy. He didn't look golden anymore. He looked exhausted, his hairline receding, his posture slumped. They had brought a lawyer with them, a guy named Nicholas, wearing a tailored suit and a tan that definitely came from a bottle. He had his briefcase open, legal pads out, ready to fight for what my mother believed was her rightful payout. They were all staring at the thick binder resting under the hands of my lawyer, Amanda. My mother leaned over and whispered something to Wyatt, patting his arm. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was performing. She was playing the grieving sister-in-law, the deeply concerned mother who just wanted her fair share of Uncle Charles's estate. She had no idea that my hand was resting on a manila envelope just beneath the edge of the table. We called it the golden file. Martha caught me looking at her. Her smirk widened into a tight, fake smile. She mouthed the words, "It will be over soon." She was right. It was going to be over, but not the way she thought. Sitting in that high-rise office, looking at the woman who had given birth to me, I didn't feel a shred of familial warmth. I felt nothing but a cold, hard sense of justice. Because looking at her smug face didn't make me angry anymore. It just transported me back to the exact moment she shattered my world. It took me back 15 years, to a porch in suburban Oregon, where the cold rain soaked right through my thin jacket. I can still smell the wet asphalt and the cheap plastic of the garbage bags. It was a Tuesday. I remember that clearly because Tuesdays were meatloaf days in our house. I had just gotten off the yellow school bus, clutching a thick envelope against my chest to keep it dry from the relentless Pacific Northwest drizzle. I was 13. That age is hard enough for anyone, but in my house it was a daily battle for survival. You see, Wyatt was 15, and in Martha's eyes he was the sun. The rest of us were just lucky enough to be planets orbiting his athletic potential. I was the smart kid, the quiet kid, the kid who didn't cost a lot of money but didn't bring any glory to the family name either. I walked up the driveway, my heart hammering a weird rhythm against my ribs. I noticed something strange right away. 2 large, black trash bags were sitting on the front porch. They were lumpy and misshapen. As I walked up the concrete steps, I recognized the corner of my blue and red checkered bedspread poking out of a tear in the plastic. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I dropped the envelope I had been protecting so carefully. I grabbed the brass door handle. Locked. I knocked on the heavy wood. Hard. "Mom! Dad!" I yelled over the sound of the rain. Nothing. I stepped back and looked through the living room window. The house was dark, but I saw movement in the kitchen. Martha was standing there. She wasn't cooking. She was just watching me. Her arms were crossed tight over her chest. She walked slowly to the front door. I heard the deadbolt click, but she only opened it a couple of inches, keeping the security chain engaged. The smell of meatloaf wafted out, making my empty stomach twist into a painful knot. "Mom, what is this? Why is my stuff out here?" My voice cracked. I sounded exactly like the terrified kid I was. Her face was a mask of pure ice. There was no anger, no sadness. Just a brutal, businesslike calculation. "I called Charles," she said, her voice completely flat. He's coming to get you. Uncle Charles? Why? What are you talking about? I pleaded, grabbing the edge of the door. We can't afford you anymore, Joshua. You made your choice. You wanted his money. Now you are his problem. From now on, you belong to him. She didn't wait for a response. She slammed the door shut. I heard the lock turn. I pounded my fists against the wood until my knuckles bled. I screamed for her. I screamed for my dad. I backed away and looked up at the second-floor window. Wyatt's room. The curtain twitched. I saw his face. My big brother. The guy I shared a bathroom with. Wyatt, please, open the door. I begged, the rain mixing with the hot tears streaming down my face. He looked down at me for 3 long seconds. Then his hand reached out and he pulled the curtain tightly shut. He blocked me out. Just like that. I sat down on the wet concrete next to the garbage bag holding my entire life, and I waited for a man I barely knew to come and pick up the pieces of a broken boy. To understand how we got to that porch, you have to look at what happened 3 days earlier in that very kitchen. 3 days before I found myself locked out in the rain, I had run into the house feeling like I had just won the lottery. That thick envelope I dropped on the porch later? It was an acceptance letter to a prestigious summer STEM academy at the state university. I burst into the kitchen. Martha was standing at the island, chopping vegetables. Robert was sitting at the table, reading a sports magazine. Wyatt was entirely focused on his phone. I got in, I shouted, waving the letter. The summer robotics and coding program. I beat out hundreds of kids for the spot. Robert didn't even look up from his magazine. Wyatt snorted, a cruel little sound. Nerd camp. Have fun with the losers. I ignored him. I walked right up to Martha and put the letter on the cutting board. Mom, look, it's a full tuition scholarship. Covers all the classes. It's worth $4,000. It's huge for my college fund. Martha finally stopped chopping. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, picked up the letter and scanned it. Her expression didn't change. There was no smile, no pride. It says here, she pointed a perfectly manicured nail at the fine print, that you still have to pay for room, board, and the materials fee. Yeah, I said, my excitement faltering just a bit. It's $1,500 total, but I already saved $300 from mowing lawns all spring. I just need you guys to help with the rest. It's an investment, Mom. Martha dropped the letter onto the counter like it was a piece of junk mail. She looked at Robert, then at Wyatt. Wyatt got into the elite football showcase down in California, she announced. Her voice suddenly had life in it. Scouts from Division I schools will be there. It's his ticket. How much is it? I asked, a sick feeling rising in my gut. $3,000, Robert finally spoke up, plus airfare and new gear. I did the math instantly. Wait, you're sending Wyatt to a camp that costs more than double mine, and he didn't even earn a scholarship? I earned this. Lower your voice, Martha snapped. Her eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. Wyatt has a real future. He has physical talent. We have to prioritize our finances, Joshua. We simply cannot afford to send both of you. So send me. I argued back, the unfairness burning in my chest. I actually won an award. Wyatt just signed up on a website. Wyatt stood up, kicking his chair back. He towered over me. Shut up, you little freak. I'm actually going to do something with my life. Nobody cares about your stupid robots. You will decline the acceptance, Joshua, Martha said, picking up her knife again. Tell them you can't go. End of discussion. I stared at them. They were a unified front, a triangle that had absolutely no room for me. The anger that had been simmering inside me for years finally boiled over. No, I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. The kitchen went dead silent. Excuse me? Robert asked, finally putting the magazine down. I said no. I am not turning it down. If you won't pay for it, I'll call Uncle Charles. He knows the value of education. I'll ask him for the money. The moment the name left my mouth, the temperature in the room plummeted. Uncle Charles was Robert's older brother. a self-made man who had cut ties with my parents years ago. My father hated him out of pure jealousy. My mother hated him because she couldn't control him. Martha walked slowly around the kitchen island until she was standing inches from my face. I could smell the sharp scent of raw onions on her fingers. "If you bring that man's name into this house," she whispered, her voice laced with venom, "if you cannot sacrifice your selfish little wants for the good of this family, then you do not belong in this family. Smart doesn't pay the bills, Joshua. Charisma does. Talent does. Now get out of my sight." I stormed upstairs and slammed my bedroom door. I thought it was just another argument. I thought the anger would blow over. I didn't know that downstairs she was already picking up the phone. Which brings us back to the rain. I sat on the concrete porch for 4 solid hours. The afternoon turned into evening. The streetlights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows across the wet lawn. Neighbors drove by, their headlights sweeping over me. I saw them slow down, look at the kids sitting next to garbage bags in a downpour, and then speed up and drive away. Nobody wants to get involved in someone else's messy life. My teeth were chattering so hard my jaw ached. I hugged my knees to my chest, trying to preserve whatever body heat I had left. Inside the house, the blue light of the television flickered through the blinds. They were watching a sitcom. They were sitting in a warm living room, probably laughing, while I was freezing on the other side of the glass. That was the exact moment my childhood officially ended. At exactly 8:30, an old, dark green sedan turned onto our street. It drove slowly, the driver checking the house numbers. It pulled into our driveway, the tires hissing on the wet pavement. A man stepped out. He was tall, with broad shoulders and graying hair. He wore a simple, functional rain jacket. He didn't run to the porch to escape the weather. He walked with a steady, deliberate pace. It was Uncle Charles. I hadn't seen him since I was 7 years old. He stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked at the locked front door. He looked at the garbage bags. And then he looked at me. His expression was impossible to read, but his eyes were sharp. He walked up the steps, took off his dry rain jacket, and wrapped it tightly around my shaking shoulders. It smelled like cedar and old paper. It was the best thing I had ever smelled in my life. "Grab your bags, son," Charles said. His voice was deep, gravelly, but incredibly calm. "Did they really kick me out?" I whispered, my voice barely working. Charles didn't look back at the house. He picked up the heaviest trash bag himself. "Some people don't know the value of a diamond even when they're holding it. Let's go home." He didn't mean that house. He meant his house in Seattle. I got into the passenger seat of his car. He turned the heat on full blast. As we backed out of the driveway, I stared at the living room window. The blue light of the TV was still flickering. No one came to the door to say goodbye. No one came to make sure I was safe. The drive to Seattle took hours. Charles didn't interrogate me. He didn't force me to talk. He stopped at a diner off the highway and bought me a hot meal, watching quietly as I ate like I hadn't seen food in days. "You didn't do anything wrong, Joshua," he said, stirring his black coffee. "Never let them convince you that demanding basic respect is a crime." That night, he put me in a spare bedroom in his massive, quiet house. It had a real bed, a desk, and a window looking out over the city. I lay there in the dark, wearing dry clothes, listening to the rain hit the glass. I had lost my parents, my brother, and my home all in one afternoon. But lying in that strange bed, wrapped in a heavy quilt, I realized something else. I was safe. For the first time in my life, I wasn't a burden. I fell asleep instantly, and I didn't look back. The next 15 years were a masterclass in building a life from scratch. Uncle Charles wasn't just wealthy. He was brilliant. He had built a real estate empire through sheer grit and flawless market intuition. He didn't just give me a room to sleep in. He gave me an education in how the world actually works. He paid for that STEM academy. He drove me there himself. He came to my high school graduation and sat in the front row, cheering louder than anyone else when I walked across the stage as valedictorian. My parents didn't even send a card. I went to college, got my degree in finance, and passed my CPA exams on the first try. I wanted to be invaluable. I wanted to prove that the kid they threw away in a garbage bag was worth something. I started working at a top accounting firm, grinding out 80-hour weeks. When I was 25, Charles pulled me into his home office. He poured us both a glass of scotch. "I'm getting older, Josh," he said, looking over his vast portfolio of properties. "I don't trust corporate suits to manage what I've built. I trust you. I want you to come work for me. I want you to be my chief financial officer." I handed in my resignation the next morning. Over the next 3 years, working side by side with Charles, I streamlined his operations, optimized his tax structures, and helped double the value of his holdings. We were a team. We were family. And what about my biological family? In 15 years, they reached out exactly 3 times. The first time was when I was 17. Martha called the house. Charles answered, put it on speaker, and gestured for me to listen. She didn't ask how I was doing in school. She didn't ask about my health. She asked Charles for a $5,000 loan because Robert had been laid off and Wyatt needed money for community college since his football dreams had crashed and burned. Charles hung up on her mid-sentence. The second time was an email sent to my corporate address. It was from Robert. He asked if I could get him a job in maintenance at one of our buildings. I deleted it. The third time was a text message from Martha. "Heard about your promotion to CFO. Must come with a nice salary. Family should share their success. Call me." I blocked the number. They were predictable. They only saw me as a walking ATM machine. They had no idea who I was, what my favorite food was, or what kept me awake at night. To them, I was just a missed investment opportunity. I built a great life. I bought a nice condo overlooking the water. I had loyal friends. I had Charles. I had healed the wounds they inflicted on me, or so I thought. Because no matter how much armor you build around your heart, nothing prepares you for the moment the only real father figure you've ever known runs out of time. Early in 2025, Charles was diagnosed with advanced congestive heart failure. The man who had seemed invincible, who had built skyscrapers and carried me out of the rain, was suddenly fragile. The doctors gave him months, but his heart gave out in weeks. I moved back into his house to take care of him. We spent our last days talking about the business, about life, about the future. He knew exactly what was going to happen when he was gone. 2 days before he passed, he pointed a shaking finger at his heavy iron safe in the corner of the room. "Joshua," he wheezed, his breathing labored. "Open the safe. Take out the thick manila envelope. The golden file." I brought it to his bedside. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. "Money brings out the absolute worst in blood relatives. When I die, they will come crawling out of the woodwork. Robert, Martha, they will try to tear down everything we built. They will try to take what is yours. I won't let them, Uncle Charles," I promised, fighting back tears. "I know you won't," he smiled weakly, "because I planned for this. Everything you need to destroy them is in that file. Do not negotiate. Do not show mercy. You close the gate permanently. Promise me." "I promise." Charles passed away peacefully in his sleep that night. I organized the funeral. It was a beautiful service, packed with business partners, tenants he had helped, and friends. Robert, Martha, and Wyatt did not attend. They didn't send flowers. They didn't call to offer condolences. But exactly 7 days after the funeral, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a Portland area code. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, Joshua, darling." The voice was sickeningly sweet. It was Martha. "What do you want, Martha?" I asked, keeping my tone completely flat. She sighed, a dramatic, theatrical sigh. "We are just so heartbroken about dear Charles. Your father is devastated. We would have come to the funeral, but you never sent us an invitation. We feel so left out of the family." "You aren't family," I stated simply. Her sweet tone vanished instantly. The ice returned. "Listen to me, you arrogant little boy. We know Charles had a massive estate. As his only surviving brother, Robert is entitled to his fair share of the inheritance. We have retained legal counsel, a very aggressive lawyer named Nicholas. He's preparing to file motions to ensure the estate isn't stolen by someone exerting undue influence over a sick, elderly man. My grip on the phone tightened. Undue influence. She was accusing me of manipulating a dying man to steal his money. You're making a massive mistake, Martha, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. We'll see you at the will reading, she snapped and hung up. The storm hadn't passed with Charles's death. It was just beginning, and they were bringing a hurricane directly to my front door. The morning after Martha's phone call, I walked into the downtown offices of Amanda Sterling. Amanda was Charles's personal estate attorney and a legal shark in her own right. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who wore sharp blazers and didn't tolerate fools. I sat across from her massive desk and recounted the phone call. Amanda didn't look surprised. She adjusted her glasses and slid a heavy document across the polished wood toward me. They didn't waste any time, Amanda said clinically. Nicholas's firm filed a caveat with the probate court first thing this morning. They are officially challenging the validity of the will. I picked up the document. The legal jargon was dense, but the core message was clear. They were claiming Charles lacked testamentary capacity and that I, as his primary caregiver and CFO, had coerced him into cutting out his rightful biological family. What does this mean practically? I asked, dropping the paper back on the desk. It means Nicholas wants to freeze the assets, Amanda explained, folding her hands. In cases involving estates this large, we're looking at over 20 million in liquid assets and property. Lawyers like Nicholas use delay tactics. They will demand medical records, depose witnesses, and tie this up in court for years. Their goal isn't to win a trial. Their goal is to starve you out until you offer them a settlement just to make them go away. A settlement? I repeated, the taste of bile rising in my throat. Yes, Amanda nodded. From a purely mathematical standpoint, offering them $500,000 right now might be cheaper than fighting a 3-year legal battle. Nicholas takes his 30% contingency fee. Martha gets a new house, and you get to move on. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the Seattle skyline. I thought about the garbage bags in the rain. I thought about Wyatt closing the curtains. I thought about Charles's last breath and his final command. Do not show mercy. I turned back to Amanda. We are not settling. I will not give them a single dime. If I write them a check, I am validating their claim that I manipulated him. I am spitting on Charles's grave. Amanda, a small, sharp smile appeared on her face. I was hoping you would say that, because Charles instructed me not to entertain a single settlement offer from them. I brought it, I said, reaching into my leather briefcase. I pulled out the manila envelope, the golden file. I placed it on her desk. Charles said everything we need is in here. Amanda untied the string and pulled out the documents. She read through the first page, then the second. Her eyebrows shot up. She looked at me, then back at the papers. My God, she whispered. Charles really was 3 steps ahead of everyone. Joshua, this is a nuclear bomb. Can we use it at the will reading? I asked. Oh, we absolutely will, Amanda said, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. But we need an audience. Nicholas will try to claim we bullied them in a private meeting. We need to make this a public execution. I left Amanda's office and immediately called Emily. Emily was my closest friend and the director of human resources for our real estate company. If I needed logistics handled flawlessly and discreetly, she was the only call I made. Emily, I need a favor, I said as I walked down 2nd Avenue. A big one. Name it, she replied instantly. The will reading is scheduled for next Thursday at 2 p.m. at Amanda's office. I need you to coordinate with 3 specific people and make sure they are sitting in that conference room before my family arrives. Who do you need? Dr. Carter, the chief of pediatric surgery at the Children's Hospital, the regional director for Habitat for Humanity, and the board president of the local animal rescue shelter. There was a brief pause on the line. Josh, why do you need charity directors at a hostile family while reading? Because, I explained, stopping at a crosswalk, Nicholas is building a narrative that this is a private family dispute where a greedy nephew stole everything. I need neutral, high-status witnesses in the room. I need people whose sheer presence commands respect and establishes Charles's true character. When the bombs go off, I want credible people there to watch the fallout. Consider it done, Emily said. Anything else? Yeah. Hire private security. 2 guards. Have them stand outside the conference room doors, just in case things get physical. For the next week, I focused purely on work. I reviewed quarterly reports, approved maintenance budgets, and finalized a commercial lease. I compartmentalized the impending collision with my past. It was a survival mechanism I had perfected over 15 years. When Thursday arrived, I put on my best tailored navy suit. I tied my tie with precise, deliberate movements. I looked at myself in the mirror. I wasn't the terrified, freezing 13-year-old boy anymore. I was the chief financial officer of a multimillion-dollar empire, and I was going into battle. I arrived at Amanda's office at 1:45. Emily had done her job perfectly. Dr. Carter and the other charity directors were already seated quietly at the far end of the massive table. Amanda was sitting at the head, organizing her files. I took my seat to Amanda's right. I placed my hands flat on the cool mahogany wood. I controlled my breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. At exactly 2 o'clock, the heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open. The receptionist led them in. Nicholas entered first, projecting an aura of aggressive confidence, carrying his leather briefcase like a weapon. Then came Martha, head held high, scanning the room, her eyes widening slightly when she saw the extra people sitting at the table. Robert shuffled in behind her, looking intensely uncomfortable. And finally, Wyatt. He avoided making eye contact with me entirely, staring stubbornly at the carpet. The game was on, and they had no idea they were already checkmated. "Good afternoon," Amanda began, her voice cutting through the tension like a razor. "We are here for the formal reading of the last will and testament of Charles David." Nicholas immediately stood up, leaning heavily on his knuckles against the table. "For the record, my clients are attending this reading under protest. We have filed a caveat challenging the validity of this document based on undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity." Amanda didn't even blink. "Your caveat has been noted, Nicholas. You may sit down. The court will process your claims in due time. Today we read the will." Nicholas scowled but slowly sank back into his chair. Martha leaned forward, her eyes locked onto the thick binder in front of Amanda. "I will skip the standard administrative boilerplate and move directly to the specific bequests," Amanda said, turning a page. Article 4. To the Seattle Children's Hospital, for the expansion of their pediatric oncology wing, I bequeath the sum of $500,000. Dr. Carter nodded respectfully. Martha gasped audibly. "500,000? She hissed to Robert. Amanda continued. To Habitat for Humanity, $250,000. To the local Animal Rescue Coalition, $250,000. "That's $1 million, Robert blurted out, his face turning red. "He gave $1 million to strangers?" "It was his money, Robert," I said quietly, speaking for the first time. "He could burn it if he wanted to." Martha shot me a look of pure venom. He was sick. He wasn't thinking straight. Family comes first. "Speaking of family," Amanda interjected smoothly, turning to the next page. Article 5. Regarding my biological brother, Robert. The room went dead silent. Robert sat up straighter. He licked his dry lips. He was expecting the brotherly share. Even a fraction of a $20 million estate would solve all of his financial problems. Amanda looked directly at Robert over the rims of her glasses. "I leave absolutely nothing of monetary value to my brother, Robert. No cash, no equity, no property." Robert's mouth dropped open. What? No, that's a mistake. I'm his brother. Please allow me to finish reading his exact words, Amanda commanded. She cleared her throat. In the year 2002, I loaned my brother Robert the sum of $80,000 to start a contracting business. He signed a formal promissory note. He subsequently squandered the money, declared bankruptcy to avoid paying his creditors, and never repaid me a single cent. Robert shrank down in his chair, looking around the room in humiliation. Dr. Carter was staring at him. Amanda wasn't done. Charles included a certified accountant's addendum, calculating standard market interest over the past 23 years. That unpaid debt now totals $210,000. Charles's will states, I consider this forgiven debt of $210,000 to be Robert's full and final inheritance. We are now completely even. That's outrageous, Martha shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. That was decades ago. You can't hold a grudge like that. Nicholas, do something. This only proves our point of a vindictive, manipulated mind, Nicholas argued weakly, looking a bit shaken by the precision of the revenge. Wyatt finally spoke. His voice was raspy. Does it say anything about me? Amanda looked at the paper, then at Wyatt. Your name does not appear anywhere in this document, Wyatt. Wyatt simply nodded, staring down at his hands. He looked broken. But Martha was just getting started. If Robert gets his debt forgiven and the charities get $1 million, Martha's voice was rising in pitch, practically vibrating with rage. Where is the rest of it? Charles owned commercial properties. He had millions in liquid assets. Where does it go? Amanda turned the final page of the main document. Article 6. Residuary estate. I leave the entirety of my remaining estate, including all real property, corporate holdings, and financial accounts, to Joshua. The silence that followed was suffocating. It lasted for exactly 3 seconds before the explosion. No! Martha screamed, jumping to her feet. Her chair crashed to the floor behind her. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. You little thief. You manipulated a dying old man into giving you everything. You stole from your own blood. I earned it, I said, my voice eerily calm against her hysterics. I helped build it. You just wanted to leech off it. We are taking this to court, Nicholas bellowed, trying to regain control of the room. He pointed a pen at Amanda. This is a textbook case of undue influence. Joshua isolated his uncle. He poisoned him against his rightful heirs. We will request an immediate injunction to freeze all estate assets. You won't see a single penny of that money, Joshua. We will bleed you dry in legal fees until you beg to settle. We have rights, Robert yelled, finally finding his courage. I am his next of kin. If this fraudulent will is thrown out, the money reverts to me under intestate law. Martha was practically hyperventilating, her face flushed dark red. You were nothing but a burden when you lived with us. And you are a parasite now. You are just a nephew. You have no right to leapfrog his actual brother. We are taking everything back. They were so confident. They thought they had the ultimate trump card. They believed that blood ties gave them an unbreakable legal safety net. If they destroyed the will, the money defaulted to Robert. I looked at the charity directors. They looked appalled at the display of pure greed. I looked at Wyatt, who was burying his face in his hands. And then I looked at Amanda. I gave her a single, slow nod. This is the moment that changes everything, when I finally took back control of my life. Thank you for staying with me this far. You are amazing. Please help me like the video and comment the number 1 below, so I know you've been with me. This not only helps more people find the story, but also lets me know my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Amanda calmly reached over to the golden file. Mr. Nicholas? Amanda said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. Before you draft those motions to freeze the assets based on your client's status as next of kin, I suggest you review the documents in this file. Because your fundamental premise is legally flawed. Amanda slid two thick, stapled documents down the center of the mahogany table. They slid perfectly, stopping right in front of Nicholas's hands. The room fell silent again, but this time, it was a confused, hesitant silence. Martha stopped screaming. Robert frowned. Nicholas picked up the first document, adjusting his glasses. Nicholas read the cover page of the first document. I watched the fake tan seem to physically drain from his face. His eyes widened, scanning the text rapidly, looking for a loophole. He didn't find one. "What is it, Nicholas?" Martha demanded, her voice losing its bravado. "What does it say?" Nicholas swallowed hard. He looked at me with genuine horror, then looked down at the paper. It's a voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. Signed and notarized by Martha and Robert 15 years ago. "So what?" Martha snapped, waving her hand dismissively. "We signed guardianship papers so Charles could enroll him in high school and handle his medical bills. It was just administrative paperwork to save us money." "No, Martha," I said, standing up from my chair. I wanted to look down at her. "You didn't just transfer guardianship. You signed away your legal rights as my parents. You permanently severed the legal bond. You were so desperate to get rid of the financial burden I represented, you signed the papers without even reading the fine print. Under the eyes of the law, you are complete strangers to me." "That doesn't matter," Robert shouted, pointing at the will. "Even if we aren't your parents, I am still Charles's brother. If the will is voided, I am still the closest living relative. The money still goes to me." Amanda let out a soft, dry chuckle. "Read the second document, Nicholas." Nicholas's hands were actually trembling as he picked up the second file. It had a heavy gold seal from the state court. He read the title. He closed his eyes and let out a long, defeated breath. "It's a decree of adult adoption," Nicholas whispered. His voice echoed in the silent room. "What does that mean?" Wyatt asked, looking up for the first time. Amanda stood up, projecting her voice so everyone could hear the final nail being hammered into the coffin. "It means that 12 years ago, when Joshua turned 16, Charles legally adopted him. Joshua is not Charles's nephew. Legally, Joshua is Charles's only son, his sole, direct descendant." The realization hit them like a physical blow. Martha staggered backward, gripping the edge of the table. "Therefore," Amanda continued flawlessly, "even if you manage to miraculously invalidate this perfectly legal will, which you won't, the laws of intestacy dictate that an estate goes to the children first. A son entirely supersedes a brother. Whether the will stands or falls, Joshua inherits 100% of the estate. You have zero legal standing. You have no case." Martha was paralyzed. The $20 million she had already spent in her mind evaporated into thin air. "Nicholas," Robert pleaded. "Do something. Sue them." Nicholas didn't look at Robert. He was looking at a third piece of paper Amanda had just slid across the table. It was an old email printout. "And one last thing, Nicholas," Amanda said, her voice dripping with professional disdain. "I noticed you didn't disclose a conflict of interest when you filed your caveat. I hold here an email dated 4 years ago, where Charles fired your law firm for unethical billing practices and explicitly barred you from ever representing his business interests. You knew Charles. You knew his mental capacity was flawless. You took this frivolous case purely to extort a settlement. I have already forwarded this email, along with a formal complaint, to the State Bar Association." Nicholas jumped up, knocking his chair over. He frantically shoved his legal pads into his briefcase. He didn't say a word to Martha. He didn't look at Robert. He grabbed his coat and practically sprinted out of the conference room, desperate to save his law license. They were abandoned. The heavy glass door swung shut behind the fleeing lawyer. The silence in the room was absolute. The charity directors sat perfectly still, processing the masterclass in legal destruction they had just witnessed. Martha looked at the empty space where her aggressive attorney had been standing. Then, she looked at me. I watched her entire demeanor shatter. The arrogance, the entitlement, the rage. It all collapsed, replaced by a desperate, ugly panic. She started to cry. But these weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of absolute defeat. She walked around the table, her hands reaching out towards me. "Joshua, Johnny, please," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "Please, son. We are so sorry. We were young, we were stressed about money. We made a terrible mistake. But we are blood. I am your mother. You can't just leave us with nothing. Robert is going to lose the house. We need help." She tried to grab my hand. I took a step back, pulling my arm away as if her touch would burn me. "Don't call me son," I said. My voice wasn't angry anymore. It was completely hollow. "You gave birth to me, yes, and then you threw me away like garbage because I was a budget deficit. You loved the picture of a perfect, successful family, and I didn't fit that picture." "That's not true," she wailed, mascara running down her cheeks. "I always loved you. Stop lying," I commanded. "You didn't love me then, and you don't love me now. You just love the zeros in my bank account. You made a gamble 15 years ago. You bet everything on Wyatt, and you threw me out to pay for it. Now the race is over. You lost. You don't get to come back to the track and demand a refund." Robert tried to speak. "Josh, be reasonable. Get out." I interrupted him. I looked at the two large security guards who had just stepped into the room from the hallway. "Amanda, are we finished here?" "We are completely finished," Amanda said, closing the binder with a satisfying, heavy thud. I looked Martha dead in the eyes one last time. "You told me 15 years ago that I was Charles's problem now. Well, Charles fixed the problem. You are legally, financially, and emotionally nothing to me. Goodbye, Martha." The security guard stepped forward, gesturing toward the door. Robert grabbed Martha's arm. He looked defeated, small, and pathetic. "Come on, Martha. It's over. Let's go." She let out a loud, ugly sob, letting Robert lead her away. They shuffled toward the exit, looking like ghosts. Wyatt followed them. As he reached the door, he stopped. He turned around and looked at me. His eyes were red. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head and walked out into the hallway. The heavy glass doors closed. I stood in the quiet conference room. Dr. Carter walked over and extended his hand. "Thank you, Joshua. That money is going to save a lot of kids." I shook his hand firmly. "It's exactly what my father would have wanted." I walked over to the window and looked out at the Seattle rain. For the first time in 15 years, I didn't feel the phantom cold of that Oregon porch. The storm had finally passed. The toxic anchor to my past had been cut. I had won. But later that night, as I sat in Charles's old car, I was about to find out that the story wasn't completely over. There was one more secret hidden in the past, and it was waiting for me in my email inbox. I walked out of Amanda's office building, leaving my parents and the shattered remains of their greedy plan behind me. The Seattle rain was still falling, a steady, rhythmic drumbeat against the concrete sidewalks. I didn't rush to my car. I stood under the awning of the high-rise for a few minutes, just letting the cool, damp air fill my lungs. The adrenaline that had carried me through the conference room was beginning to fade, leaving behind a profound sense of exhaustion. But it was a good exhaustion, the kind you feel after carrying a heavy weight for miles and finally setting it down. I walked to the parking garage and got into Charles's old car. He could have afforded a fleet of luxury vehicles, but he always drove this reliable, unassuming sedan. The leather seats still smelled faintly of his cedar cologne. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white, and I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since I was 13 years old. It was over. The legal battle was dead before it even began. Martha and Robert were gone. I reached into my pocket to pull out my keys, but my fingers brushed against my phone. The screen lit up. A new email notification. I almost ignored it. I wanted to drive home, pour a glass of Charles's favorite scotch, and look out at the water. But the name on the notification stopped me cold. Wyatt. The subject line was simple. The truth about that Tuesday. My thumb hovered over the delete button. Part of me, the part that had spent 15 years building a fortress around my heart, screamed at me to swipe left. Delete it. Block the address. Erase him from my existence just like I had erased our parents. I had won the war. There was absolutely no reason to open a letter from the enemy camp. But I didn't delete it. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when it comes to the ghosts of your past. I tapped the screen and opened the message. The email wasn't particularly long, but every single word felt heavy. It felt like it had been carved out of something sharp and painful. Joshua, it began. I know you probably hate me. You have every right to. I sat in that conference room today and watched you systematically dismantle Mom and Dad. You were right about everything. Every single word you said was the absolute truth. But there is something you don't know. There is something I have carried with me for 15 years. A secret that has eaten away at me every single time it rains. I shifted in the driver's seat, the leather creaking softly in the quiet garage. You know, I watched you from my bedroom window that night, the email continued. You saw the curtains move. You begged me to open the door. But you don't know how long I actually stood there. I stood at that window for 4 hours, Joshua. I watched you sitting on those garbage bags in the freezing rain. I watched you shivering. I watched the neighbors slow down and drive past you. I had my hand on the doorknob a dozen times. I wanted to run down the stairs, unlock the deadbolt, bring you a blanket, and tell Mom and Dad to go to hell. But I didn't. I felt a hard lump form in my throat. I swallowed heavily, forcing myself to keep reading. I didn't open the door, and it wasn't just because I was terrified of Mom's temper. It was because I knew what they were going to do. I knew about their plan 3 entire days before they actually did it. I heard them talking in the garage late at night. Mom told Dad that if they could just get rid of you, if they could push you onto Uncle Charles, they could easily afford the travel gear for my football camp. They were looking for a way to fund my college fund through athletic scholarships, and you were standing in the way of their budget. I heard them planning to throw my own little brother out into the street just to make room for my ego. And I didn't warn you. The words blurred on the screen. I had to blink hard to clear my vision. My own brother knew. He knew I was going to be ambushed. I didn't say a word because I wanted to go to that football camp. I was 15 years old, incredibly selfish, and deeply brainwashed by Mom's constant praise. I thought that camp was my guaranteed ticket to a professional sports career. I traded my own brother for a chance at being a star. I sold you out for a pair of cleats and a plane ticket. I gripped the phone tighter. The sheer honesty of it was staggering. There were no excuses. There was no attempt to soften the blow. I am so sorry, Joshua. I know that word is completely worthless to you now. That football camp was a total bust. I blew out my knee during my sophomore year of college. The athletic dream died permanently. Now I am 34 years old. I went through a brutal divorce. I lost the primary custody battle for my kids because I couldn't afford a decent lawyer. I work back-to-back night shifts at a fulfillment warehouse just to pay my alimony and rent. And during those long shifts, I realized that the only thing I ever actually earned in my entire life was the massive guilt of letting my little brother sit out in the cold rain. I am not writing this to ask for a handout. Please believe that. I do not want a single dime of Charles's inheritance. I just couldn't let you go on thinking I was merely a passive bystander. I was an active accomplice. I hope you have a wonderful life, Joshua. You deserve it more than any of us. I put the phone down on the passenger seat. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. For years, I had told myself a specific narrative to make the pain manageable. I had convinced myself that Wyatt was just a dumb kid, a victim of Martha's extreme narcissism who didn't know any better. Reading that he had known, that he had actively traded my safety for a football camp, hit me with a fresh, violent wave of nausea. But as the initial shock began to wear off, something else took its place. I looked at the tone of his letter. I read the words again. There was no defense. He didn't say we were struggling or Mom made me do it. It was just raw, ugly, unvarnished honesty. It was the very first honest thing a member of my biological family had said to me since I was a child. He took absolute accountability. I didn't reply that night. I started the car and drove home to the large, empty house in Ballard. I needed time to process this earthquake. I took an entire month to respond. I focused entirely on the real estate business. We officially closed a massive deal on a new commercial warehouse district. I established the legal framework for a new philanthropic foundation in Charles's name. I kept myself incredibly busy, but Wyatt's email sat in my inbox, unread but explicitly undelete. I brought it up during a session with my therapist. I had been seeing her for a few years, mostly to untangle the complex web of abandonment issues I carried around like invisible luggage. "Why haven't you deleted the email, Joshua?" she asked, adjusting her notebook. "Because he didn't ask for a single dollar," I answered honestly. "That is the only reason. Every other person in that bloodline only contacts me when they want to extract value from me." Wyatt just confessed. He handed me the knife he used to stab me, and he didn't ask for a bandage. "And how does his confession make you feel?" "Validated," I admitted, looking at the floor. "And incredibly sad. He sounds completely broken. His life fell apart." "You are not responsible for putting his pieces back together," she gently reminded me. "He is a grown man who made his own choices." "I know that," I said. "But Charles taught me that family is a choice. Wyatt made a horrific choice when he was 15. But right now, today, he seems to be the only one who actually realizes it was a horrific choice." That Tuesday night, I sat down at my kitchen island. I poured a measure of scotch, opened my laptop, and hit reply. My message was brief and uncompromising. "Wyatt, I read your email. It took guts to admit that you were a coward back then. You were deeply selfish, and I cannot simply forget that. But I also know what it was like to live inside that house. I know the crushing pressure Martha put on you to be the golden child. I know what it is like to be a pawn in her twisted games. I am not ready to be your brother. I honestly don't know if I ever will be. But I am willing to have one conversation. Here are my absolute conditions. 1. We do not discuss mom or dad. I do not care about their mortgage, their health, or their complaints. 2. We never discuss the inheritance or Charles's money. Not a single penny. 3. If I sense for even a second that you are fishing for a loan or a handout, I will hang up and block your contact information permanently. If you agree to these terms, I am free for a video call this Saturday at 2 p.m. He replied exactly 4 minutes later. "I agree to all terms. Thank you." When Saturday arrived, I felt a strange knot in my stomach. I set my laptop up in my home office. My heart was hammering harder than it had during the boardroom confrontation. The boardroom was just business and legal strategy. This was blood. At precisely 2 o'clock, the incoming video call notification chimed. I clicked the green button. Wyatt's face filled the screen. The connection was slightly grainy, the lighting poor. He was sitting in what looked like a remarkably cramped, dim kitchen. I could see cheap, peeling laminate cabinets behind him and a stack of folded laundry resting on a plastic chair. He looked even worse than he had at the lawyer's office. He was wearing a faded gray t-shirt stained with what looked like motor oil. He looked like a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Hey," he said. He didn't try to force a fake smile. "Hey," I replied. We just stared at each other for a long moment. Two grown men who shared a face, who shared a painful history, but who were essentially strangers. "I really appreciate you doing this," he said, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "I honestly didn't think you would ever reply." "I almost didn't." I told him the truth. "So, you are working at a fulfillment warehouse?" "Yeah," he nodded. "Night shifts. The pay covers the basic bills, barely. The alimony and child support take a massive bite out of my salary. But it's honest work." "You and your wife are completely done?" "She left when the professional sports dream officially died," he said without bitterness, just stating a fact. "She took the kids. I get them every other weekend. I'm actually staying in a tiny studio apartment right now. It's not much." He turned the laptop camera slightly. I saw a mattress resting directly on the floor in the corner of the room, and a small television sitting on a plastic milk crate. It was a stark, jarring contrast to the glorious, wealthy future Martha had constantly promised him. "I'm sorry, Wyatt," I said, and to my own surprise, I actually meant it. "Don't be." He let out a short, hollow laugh. "I absolutely earned this. I bought into Mom's hype. I thought I was simply too special to work hard. By the time I finally realized I wasn't a god, I was 25 years old with a ruined knee and zero college education." He looked directly into the camera. "You know, when Charles took you away, the atmosphere in that house died. Dad started drinking a lot more. Mom focused every ounce of her psychotic energy directly on me. It was suffocating. Every single time I dropped a pass in a game, every time I got a bad grade, she would scream at me. She would scream that they sacrificed you for my success, so I had better make it worth the price." I physically winced. "That is a heavy burden for a kid." "It's not an excuse," he quickly clarified, holding up a hand. "I still should have come down those stairs and opened the door for you. I think about that failure every time it rains in this city." Before I could respond, a tiny voice piped up from somewhere off camera. "Daddy, can I have some apple juice?" A little girl, maybe 5 years old, wandered into the frame. She had messy blonde hair and was clutching a worn-out stuffed bear. Wyatt's entire face transformed instantly. The hard lines of exhaustion vanished, replaced by a profound, gentle warmth. He reached down and lifted her onto his lap. "Hey there, sweetie," he said softly. "Say hi to your Uncle Joshua." The little girl peered at the screen shyly. "Hi." My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know how to react. "Hi there," I managed to say, managing a small smile. "What is your name?" "Lily," she whispered, burying her face against Wyatt's shoulder. "This is Lily," Wyatt said, gently smoothing her messy hair. "Her brother is in the other room. They are my entire world, Joshua. I'm just trying really hard not to mess them up the way Mom and Dad messed us up." We talked for another 30 minutes after Lily ran off to play. We rigorously adhered to the boundaries. We didn't talk about Martha. We didn't mention the inheritance. We talked about the local sports teams. We talked about the changing landscape of the city. When it was finally time to end the call, Wyatt looked at me with deep sincerity. "Joshua, I know I can never undo the past, but I want you to know that I am incredibly proud of you. I mean it. You beat them. You built something amazing. You got out." "We both got out, Wyatt," I said quietly, "just in very different ways." He looked around his shabby, cramped studio apartment. "Yeah, I guess I did." I closed the laptop. I sat in my luxurious home office for a long time, listening to the silence of my house. I didn't open my banking app to wire him money. Doing that would have instantly broken the fragile new dynamic we had just established. It would have turned me right back into the financial resource Martha always wanted me to be. Charles had taught me a vital lesson. Enabling someone's struggles with cash is not the same thing as actually helping them. But I did do something else. The following Monday, I ordered a comprehensive study guide and textbook for the state HVAC certification exam. I mailed it directly to the warehouse where he worked. Inside the front cover, I wrote a short note. "Skilled trades pay the bills. Good luck." He texted me a picture of the book 2 days later. The message just said, "Thank you. Studying begins tonight." It wasn't a perfect, cinematic fairy tale ending. We weren't suddenly best friends. But the 15-year silence was broken, and we were finally standing on honest ground. Let's fast forward exactly 1 year. March 2026. The sky over Seattle was a brilliant, crisp blue. The kind of rare, beautiful day that makes you entirely forget about the 9 months of endless gray drizzle. I stood on the sidewalk in the Capitol Hill district, looking up at a beautiful 3-story brick building. It was the very first commercial property Charles had ever purchased back in the late 80s. We had just spent 6 months completing a massive top-to-bottom renovation. The brick was sandblasted clean, the windows were modernized, and the interior was completely transformed. A small, vibrant crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. Emily was there, holding a clipboard and directing the catering staff. Dr. Carter from the hospital had come to show his support. Several of our long-term residential tenants were mingling, drinking coffee, and standing quietly in the back of the crowd, wearing a clean, ironed polo shirt and a new pair of jeans, was Wyatt. He had driven up for the morning. He looked significantly healthier. The dark circles under his eyes were fading. He had passed his written exams and was halfway through his practical HVAC certification. He was rebuilding his life entirely on his own merit. I stepped up to the microphone positioned near the front entrance. I adjusted my tie. I wasn't wearing funeral black today. I wore a deep, vibrant blue. "Thank you all so much for being here," I said, my voice echoing slightly off the restored brick facade. "Most of you in this neighborhood knew Charles David as a landlord. You knew him as a tough businessman. You knew him as the guy who drove a remarkably beat-up car despite owning half the block." A ripple of warm laughter moved through the crowd. "But to me," I continued, my voice softening, "he was the man who opened a door for me when everyone else in my life had bolted theirs shut. He was the man who taught me that true value isn't something you inherit through your bloodline. Value is something you build with your own two hands." I turned toward the covered entrance of the building. "I am incredibly proud to rededicate this building today. It will no longer serve as commercial office space. Welcome to the Charles David Center for Youth." Emily pulled a velvet cord, and a dark cloth fell away to reveal a gleaming bronze plaque mounted next to the heavy glass doors. The text read, "Dedicated to the belief that every child deserves a safe harbor. Home of the Charles David STEM Scholarship Foundation." I had converted the entire ground floor into a state-of-the-art educational facility and the headquarters for our new foundation. We weren't just writing checks anymore. We had actively awarded 5 full-ride scholarships to kids exactly like I used to be. Kids from broken, toxic homes. Kids who had the brains and the drive, but absolutely zero budget or support. One of our very first recipients was a 14-year-old girl named Sarah. She was standing in the front row of the crowd, clutching a newly issued robotics kit against her chest like it was a bar of solid gold. When I looked at her, I saw my 13-year-old self. I saw the hunger, the deep-seated fear of failure, and the desperate, fragile hope. But unlike my story, Sarah wasn't going to be thrown out into the rain. We were going to make sure of that. After the formal ribbon-cutting ceremony, the crowd began to mingle and tour the facility. I walked over to where Wyatt was standing near the refreshment table. "The plaque looks great," he said, offering a genuine smile. "Thanks for driving up here," I said. "I wouldn't have missed it," he replied. He hesitated for a second, then reached into his pocket. "Listen, I brought you something. It really isn't much. I actually made it in the community college shop class as part of my welding practice." He handed me a small, heavy object. It was a keychain, but it wasn't store-bought. It was meticulously welded together from small scraps of copper piping, polished to a bright, gleaming shine. It was industrial, rugged, and completely unique. "It's a bit abstract," he grinned sheepishly, rubbing his neck. I looked at the copper keychain resting in my palm. It was the most valuable gift a blood relative had ever given me. "I love it, Wyatt," I said, and I pulled my car keys out of my pocket and clipped the copper ornament onto the ring immediately. "How are the kids doing?" "They are great," he beamed. "Lily starts kindergarten next week. Her brother just made the local soccer team." He paused, his expression growing slightly serious. "Mom called me last Tuesday." I felt my shoulders instinctively stiffen. "Did she?" "Yeah. She saw an article online about the new scholarship foundation you were launching. She wanted to know if I had your direct phone number yet. She told me she thinks she might qualify to apply for a hardship grant to help pay off their second mortgage." I let out a short, sharp, cynical laugh. The absolute audacity of that woman never ceased to amaze me. "And what exactly did you tell her?" Wyatt looked me dead in the eye, unwavering. "I told her that I absolutely did not have your number. And then I told her that if she ever called me at work to complain about money again, I would block her number too. A real, genuine smile spread across my face. Good man. She is never going to change, Wyatt. I see that now, Joshua. He nodded slowly. Her and Dad, they live in their own delusional world. But we don't have to live there with them anymore. No, I agreed. We don't. We shook hands. It was a firm, solid grip between two equals. I watched him walk down the sidewalk toward his truck. It was an older model Ford, but it was spotless. He was rebuilding his life brick by painstaking brick. Just like Charles had built his empire. Just like I was building my future. I looked back up at the brick building. I looked at the bronze plaque gleaming in the sunlight. I took a deep breath of the crisp Seattle air. For the first time in my entire conscious life, I didn't feel the phantom weight of those heavy black garbage bags dragging down my hands. I didn't feel the biting cold of that Oregon rain. I felt warm. I felt incredibly light. That evening, as I drove back to my condo, the copper keychain Wyatt made jingled softly against the steering column. It got me thinking about everything I had been through, and everything I wanted to share with you all today. If you take absolutely anything away from my story, please let it be this. Your worth as a human being is not conditional. I spent the first 13 years of my life trapped in a psychological cage. I truly believed that if I was just a little bit smarter, if I was a little bit quieter, or if I cost a little less money, my parents would finally love me the way they loved my brother. I internalized their rejection. I thought their inability to care for me was a reflection of my own failure. It wasn't. There is a psychological concept known as conditional self-worth. It is the toxic trap of believing that you only matter, that you only have value, if you meet someone else's impossible, shifting standards. My parents put me in that trap, and they tried desperately to keep me locked in it even after I had escaped and built my own success. But Uncle Charles taught me the ultimate antidote to that poison. The antidote is boundaries. Forgiveness is a beautiful concept, but it does not mean letting toxic people back into your life so they can hurt you all over again. Forgiveness is something you do entirely for yourself. It is the act of cutting the heavy anchor so your ship can finally sail away. Reconciliation, on the other hand, is a choice. It is never an obligation just because you share the same DNA. I chose to open the door just a tiny crack for my brother, Wyatt, because he took absolute ownership of his terrible actions. He didn't make excuses. He did the hard work to change. But I chose to keep the heavy deadbolt firmly locked against Martha and Robert because they only ever wanted to rob the house. You have the absolute right to choose your family. You have the right to define your own inherent value. And you have the right to say no even to the very people who gave you life. Do not let anyone weaponize your empathy against you. Sharing this has been the hardest thing I've ever done on this channel. It requires opening up old wounds. But I know there are people watching this right now who are sitting in the rain, wondering why they aren't good enough for the people who are supposed to love them. I am here to tell you that you are enough. The only person you ever need to prove anything to is the person looking back at you in the mirror. I really want to know what you think about all of this. What is the one lesson or perspective from this story that resonates with you the most? Share your thoughts down in the comments below. Or, if this story simply gave you a sense of validation, if you appreciate the lessons about boundaries and self-worth we discussed today, just drop the word good in the comments. It lets me know that these difficult experiences can actually create a positive impact, and that we are on this healing journey together. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Take care of yourselves out there.